I have worked rock for 31 years. Lunar basalt, Martian regolith, the compressed iron silicate of the Kethavar belt. Rock does not surprise me. Tells you what it intends to do if you learn to listen. The small pops before a ceiling shifts. The groan a support column makes 3 minutes before it gives. I have listened long enough that the listening is in my bones now, not my ears. Shaft 9 on Drevosi Colony was a secondary extraction gallery, low priority, a lateral cut off the main bore. We used it for equipment staging. Nobody worked it full shifts. On the morning the eastern face came down, a stress fracture nobody had mapped, a vein of softer material behind the survey markers. We had 11 workers inside. We got 10 out in the first 4 minutes. The 11th, a young cage operator named Pell, had a broken collarbone and a pinned leg, and we had him free and up the winch line inside 12 minutes. The Colonial Authority ran their head count, 11 in, 11 out. They sealed the gate. I was signing the incident form when the proximity sensor on my belt chirped. It was a low chirp, the kind a secondary sensor makes when it catches a biological reading at the edge of its range. Faint, small, possibly an error. I had learned, 31 years, not to dismiss small sounds. I told the site supervisor I was going back in for a tool check. He looked at me the way men look at you, when they know you are not telling them everything. And he let me go. The shaft entrance had been sealed with a pressure gate. Not welded, not permanent, just locked. I had the master key. I had always had the master key. That is what a foreman is for. Inside the air was already thickening. The ventilation fans had been cut when they sealed the gate. My helmet lamp threw a pale cone into the dust, and I moved down the gallery toward where, sensor said, the signal was. The ceiling had come down in a diagonal shelf. There was a gap on the left side, maybe a meter high, and beyond it the gallery opened again into the staging area. I went through on my hands and knees. The sensor chirped faster. She was sitting behind a collapsed equipment rack, knees pulled to her chest, watching me come with eyes the color of pale copper. She was small, waist-high to me maybe if she stood. She had the long tapered ears of the Drevosi Highland people, and her skin was a gray-blue, the same shade as the dust settling around her. She wore a child's work smock, the kind the colony gave to families of workers for play days when parents brought their young ones to the site. A small doll made of copper wire and canvas sat in her lap. She had not made a sound. I knelt down so my face was level with hers. I turned my lamp slightly away so it was not shining in her eyes. She did not run. She looked at me, at my face, at my hands, at the tunnel behind me, and she made a small sound in the back of her throat. Not a word I knew. A sound that meant, I think, "Are you the one who comes for me, or the next bad thing?" I took off my right glove, held my open hand toward her. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put her small hand in mine. I squeezed once, gently, and did not let go. We had perhaps 40 minutes of breathable air in that section of the gallery. The ceiling was still settling. I could hear it. The periodic small cracks that meant the stress was redistributing, and had not finished. The gap I had come through had narrowed slightly already. I knew what that meant. I did not let myself calculate it in front of her. I just started moving. She kept pace. She did not cry. She held my hand, and she held her wire doll in the other hand, and she moved when I moved, and stopped when I stopped. When I had to go to my knees through a low section, she went to her knees beside me without being told. At one point, a chunk of ceiling the size of my torso came down 10 meters ahead of us, and she flinched hard against my side, and I put my arm around, and held her until she was still, and then we went on. I talked to her as we walked. I do not know if she understood the words. I do not think it mattered. I told her about the first shaft I ever worked, a copper mine on a moon whose name I cannot spell properly in any alphabet. I told her about the way rock sounds before it gives, and the way it sounds when it is safe. I told her about my daughter, is grown now and lives on the other side of the system, and sends me messages I am slow to answer. Told her I was not going to leave her in the dark. She listened. The way children listen when they have decided to trust you completely. The gap at the entrance had narrowed to perhaps 70 centimeters. I went through sideways. She came through after me, and I caught her on the other side, and we stood in the outer gallery. And I heard the section behind us groan once, deep and final, and then go quiet. I held her for a moment, just held her. Then I picked her up. Because she was small, and she had been in there a long time. and she let me, and I carried her toward the light at the top of the shaft. The site supervisor met us at the gate. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at the girl. He looked at me. He called for a medic on his radio, and he did not ask me how I had gotten back inside. The Colonial medical team checked her. She was unhurt, dehydrated, dusty, frightened in the way that children hold fright. In the shoulders, in the eyes, not in noise. The medics gave her water and she drank it, and held her wire doll, and watched me from across the room. I asked who she belonged to. The Colonial Authority ran their records. Her father had worked Shaft 9, one of the 11 we had evacuated. He had come out with a laceration on his arm and a ruptured eardrum, and in the chaos of the evacuation and the head count and the sealing of the gate, he had believed she was out already, ahead of him. She had wandered back in. Children do that. They look for things they have dropped. She had gone backward for the doll. Her father was alive. The reunion, I was told, was not quiet. What nobody told me, what I learned from the Colonial records only later, was that her father had no permanent residency status on Dravosi. He was a contract worker, 3 months into a 6-month rotation. When the shaft collapse triggered an insurance review, his contract was flagged. The Colonial Authority was going to ship him back to Thesavar Station, which is a transshipment hub and not a home, and the girl would go with him. I sat with that for a day. Then I walked into the Colonial Administrator's office, and I put a different form on his desk. Not an incident form, a sponsorship declaration. Permanent residency sponsorship for one contract worker and his dependent, countersigned by a senior site foreman, with continuous residency of 11 years. The administrator looked at the form. He said, "You understand this obligates you financially for 3 years of their residency costs." I said, "I understand." He said, "You barely know these people." I said, "I know which ones stay." He stamped the form. I am not a man who tells this story often. The girl is 13 now. She works half days in the equipment bay on weekends. Her choice, not mine, and she is better with a calibration tool than workers twice her age. Father became a full crew member 2 years after the collapse. He runs the ventilation systems for the eastern galleries. He knows that equipment better than anyone, which makes a certain kind of sense. She still has the wire doll. It sits on the shelf above her bunk in their quarters. She has not repaired it, though the canvas has frayed. I asked her once why she went back for it that morning. She thought about it for a while. Then she said, "Because it was mine and I did not want it to be lost in the dark." I understood that. I have spent 31 years making sure things that matter do not get left in the dark. A survey marker, a structural reading, a small living thing behind a collapsed equipment rack with copper eyes and a wire doll and a sound in her throat that asked, "Are you the one who comes for me?" Yes, I told her then without words. Yes, that is exactly what I am.